Hello, everyone. It's me, Settlers Lament, here with Charlemagne and Benedict the 17th. Unfortunately, Officer Cutie Pie had to cancel last minute. We were supposed to replace her with Fritz Imperial, but he just canceled the last minute too. He might be along a bit later. Um, but yes, so it's just the three of us for right now. But so tonight we're going to be mostly talking about the extremely peaceful protests that have been going on. And I don't know. I mean, my summary of this topic would just be that this whole situation is all just so stupid. It's so unnecessary. None of this has to happen, but it does, and everyone just allows it to happen. There's no reason that cities all across America need to be burnt down. But it just happens, and the government allows it to happen. So I don't know, that's my starting thoughts.
I'd go further and say not only allow, but is actively complicit in. I mean,
Yes.
the way the government is basically encouraging the riots by just pulling the police out in some cases, or if you follow what's going on with the New York police closely, it seems like they're deployed, but they don't really have specific orders in terms of how to restore order. And obviously, in a city the size of New York, even just in Manhattan, you need a strategy to actually resolve the situation without things getting out of hand. So yeah, I would say the government is implicit in this, or complicit in this rather.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing is if we look at the most recent news, and I don't know if everyone here has seen it yet, but the prosecutor, the state's attorney in Minneapolis, recently raised the charge from third-degree murder to second-degree murder for the officers who knelt on Mr. Floyd's neck. The decision to do that is kind of strange because I don't know how you would prove second degree murder. You have to show that there was intent to kill, and I really don't see any strong argument for intent there. Even third degree murder, where you have to prove depravity of heart and callous disregard for human life, that was already debatable. But so the question is, what is the reason for the state's attorney deciding to prosecute with second degree murder? Now, running on the theme of is the government encouraging the riots? An interesting thing is the Minneapolis state's attorney was recently posted on Twitter a picture of himself with some Antifa stuff in an Antifa book where he positively talked about this book. So the question is, if the Minneapolis state's attorney is an Antifa supporter, why would he try raise the charge to something that he's probably not going to be able to get a conviction on?
I don't know. Yeah, you go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, just talking to the morons on Twitter, I just know some progressives. If you dare say this is anything less than first-degree murder, they'll say you're complicit in it. And I mean, they're not charging that, obviously. But it's just there's such a insane level of hype around all of this that downplaying the legal culpability at all is seen as support of it. Just saying that it's third degree murder, which seems pretty clearly the most accurate charge to lay, rather than if the second degree murder. That alone, I know, is just going to annoy a lot of these people. So I think it's as simple as that. They just want the hardest. They just want the hardest sentence possible, and it's the cart is going before the horse, and it's going to and they care more about trying to get a harder charge than getting a charge that will actually stick. I mean, if you wanted to be a bit conspiratorial about it, it would play into some of these Antifa people if they ended up failing to prosecute him. If we get a whole nother round of riots when they fail to prove second-degree murder and he gets to walk.
Right.
No, I'm not saying that is what they're doing. I'm just saying, if I was an Antifa person, and if I didn't care about virtue ethics, that might be something you'd do.
And kind of coming with that out of the gun, right out of the gate, people might be saying, well, is there evidence that Antifa's behind this and stuff? I mean, yeah, if you go on Twitter, it's very clear that Antifa people support the riots. As far as evidence of Antifa being involved, I would say there is. Speaking to a lot of cops in my area, did you guys see the news story about the mysterious pallets of bricks that were appearing in several different cities?
Yes.
Yeah. I only heard about it happening once, but yeah.
It's happened in several cities where, pallets of bricks suddenly appeared in front of, like, City Hall in Baltimore, and I think City Hall in Austin, too. Austin, Texas. I don't know of other cities, but from what I hear, it's multiple cities. So, I mean, do we know it's Antifa? No. Does it fit Antifa's, method? Yeah, kind of. And, it's very clear that there is some national level organization involved in this. Beyond this, the other evidence is that Antifa did try in the 2015 riots to get involved in Baltimore. I don't know about in Ferguson. They weren't able to. Kind of a long story to get into there. But I mean that's a question that sort of gets to the heart of the matter. How much of these protests is legitimate outrage, which I think there is an argument for some, and how much of it is politically directed destruction?
I would say this whole situation is just layers upon layer of event opportunism. I think we're really in a position of just having to come up with a lot of conjecture on this topic based on observations. It's really hard to really drill down into the truth. I mean, I would say a little bit of both. I think what we're seeing is, I suspect these national organizations like Black Lives Matter, Antifa, and other left-wing organizations, they basically have contingency plans in place, probably alongside actual Democrat institutions to basically start these riots whenever they want. I mean, I think that it's necessary to have a certain amount of outrage. It's necessary to have an event, but I think that they can basically start or end riots like this at will. And I think probably what happened is we're just seeing opportunism. So, they were just, who knows how many events like what this cop did has occurred over the last few years. They were probably waiting for something like this to get caught on camera before the election in 2020 and then just trigger the event, right? I mean, because at this point, we can at least say it should be clear to everyone that every governor, every mayor, they could stop the riots at any point very easily. I mean, we all understand that, right? So the government is clearly allowing these to go on purpose and is likely fueling them. I don't see why they wouldn't. And they're probably, fueling them through all these NGOs that are part of the Iron Polygon, as you would describe it from the neo-reactionary perspective. So I think there's both conspiracy and opportunism and just organic events all occurring in this big mix. And it's really hard to differentiate, what's what, but I'm pretty confident that it's some mixture of all three of these things.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it necessarily requires that much conspiracy. I mean,
No.
I'm sure there is some conspiracy. I'm not saying that there's.
Yeah, when I say conspiracy, I just mean like Black Lives Matter leaders or Antifa leaders or whoever just talking to people in the government, talking to Democratic,
But I just I totally agree, of course, that this all could be stopped as soon as the government wants it to be stopped. It's insane that it hasn't been, and it would require an incredibly small amount of force to do that. But I don't know. I've just spent so much time around progressives in my short life. that like I don't think that the reason that they don't shut down that they don't shut down this violence, I don't think the reason is is anything particularly conspiratorial. I think it's basically just they think it would be racist to stop these people from rioting. And I think it's mostly as simple as that. I mean, I'm sure some people have connections, stuff like that. But I've known a lot of progressives, and as insane as it is, telling someone to not steal a TV is something they would legitimately consider racist.
So here's the thing about this is I'm not actually sure that progressives realize or believe that these riots are really happening on the scale that they are. I've seen the way they react to any right-wing media, and they basically view anything that doesn't come from the official media, we'll say, is just lie, essentially. I mean, so I don't even know that they actually think anything's happening. I think they might legitimately think that, well, maybe legitimately is too strong a word, but they might, in their own minds, actually believe that there's just peaceful protests going on, and yeah, there's a little bit of violence. Whereas, on our hand, we can see that clearly the majority of what's happening is rioting and not protests. While I can acknowledge that there have been some protests that didn't involve violence, I mean, you can't deny the rioting unless you're just completely blind to all of the reporting on it, either willfully or otherwise. So I think it might be more of a matter, in many cases, it might be more of a matter of just blindness, willful or otherwise, as opposed to actually, supporting things like literal stealing. I mean, maybe I'm sure there's plenty of people who support that too, right? I guess I'm saying there's people like all across the board in terms of how regular people sort of view this.
Yeah, I mean, well, what I found just perusing Twitter is that there seems to be a really interesting doublethink when it comes to the riots, regarding violent versus non-violent protest. Because they're very, kind of your left-wing Twitterati, they're very proud of the fact, the riot, the protest was non-violent, and they'll say this even in contradiction to the fact, and at the same time, they'll say, well, they have to be violent in order to accomplish their goals. At the same time, they clearly see peaceful riots as a virtue until they have to justify the actions of Antifa or something. At which point, it suddenly the fact that the protests, that some protests were peaceful, doesn't matter.
Mm.
Have you guys seen similar stuff?
Yeah, I don't know. The progressive moral system seems to be just whatever serves them at the moment. I don't know. I don't think it can even really be explained better than that. That they'll talk about peaceful protesting, and I mean they've been venerating people like Gandhi and Martin Luther King for decades, and talking about how epic and peaceful they were. And then they immediately switch to stealing TVs and smashing shop windows is epic too. It just, I don't know, it seems to be whatever happens to be convenient for them in the moment is their moral system.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people on the left probably gleefully support that sort of destruction, even if on the surface level they'll act opposed to it if you ask them about it. It's I wish we really knew more about the psyche of specific people in this case. I actually I know people who have gone to actual protests, and they've been peaceful protests. And I wonder, like, what do you understand? What you're participating in right now? Like, I couldn't in good consciousness participate in any protest at this point, because it's all tied together. This is all one big event, and it's on the whole very violent. And I wondered, like, do these people really understand what they're participating in, or are they just totally indoctrinated and or deluded and literally don't realize how much violence there is. I just don't know. I hate, I know it feels like I'm cutting the progressive some slack here, which, I hate to do, but at the same time, I don't want to just, outright condemn everybody as if, they wholeheartedly are okay with the rioters. I don't know. This whole situation is just really, really cloudy. I mean, I guess the one thing I can say with certainty is that this needs to end now as quickly as possible. It should have ended a week ago. There's really no moral basis for any of this to continue, and the government needs to come in with hard force at this point and put an immediate stop to it, because the amount of damage that's been done by allowing this to continue, it is far beyond any conception of justice from any perspective, right? I mean,
yeah, like I said, it's just also stupid. You get the constant Twitter arguments on this. Life is worth more than property. Like, what is it? Because, like you said, there are a lot of progressives that that probably don't realize the scale of what's happening. But I really don't quite understand the progressives that do support all the violence. Like, what exactly do they think they're accomplishing? Because I understand that these people are just bad people, a lot of them, and they would support violence if it thought it would accomplish something for them. Like, none of this is even doing anything for them. Like, what's the point of supporting this? And a lot of progressives are openly supporting the actual violence.
This is one thing that's really confusing me, because they've been whining for years about how Trump is a dictator, and we basically live in like a military police state. And what I see is they're literally setting up the conditions, the perfect conditions that he could ask for to do exactly that. I mean, they're baiting it for God's sake. And I can't wrap my head around it. I just don't understand. Like, it feels kind of silly, having, I don't know, like, I've spent so much time analyzing the cathedral and whatnot, and I understand the mechanisms of how this works, right? But on an actual personal psychological level, this has exploded to such a degree where I literally can't understand the psyche of a lot of the people I live with anymore, and that's just really troubling. I guess the one thing is that this has really just highlighted the extent to which we live in two different countries. I mean, we at least two, right? I mean, there are people among us that are just fundamentally incompatible with how, I would say, normal people actually want to live their lives.
What about you, Benedict? Do you have anything to say on that?
Yeah, and I can't remember exactly the context. You brought it up in Charlemagne, but you mentioned something about rights, about protests and the right to association. That touched on an important idea that I think, I think it's going to be non-controversial in this space, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page here. When we talk about the right to free association, it's often, put in with the right to free speech and a lot of other things as, an individual right. But it really doesn't make sense to consider it as an individual right, because obviously it requires another person to, associate with, right? And obviously that's just talking one-on-one, but, when it comes to these protests, like, if you're associating with something like Black Lives Matter, what exactly does that mean? I think it's important because a lot of people say, well, there was rioting at the peaceful protest. And at that point, I think the reasonable thing to say is, well, then the protest wasn't peaceful because there was rioting at it. They want to draw a distinction between the bad actors and the rest of the protest. But the thing is, the bad actors were at the protest because they were invited to be there. They were, everyone's welcome to participate. And I think we kind of have to understand what's almost at a metaphysical level, what happens when you associate with someone, when you join a group, be it the Catholic Church, be it, Black Lives Matter, be it whatever, like there's a certain sense where your individual responsibility does get bound up in, the collective. And
Absolutely.
so in a sense, the collective has a responsibility to police itself, to restrict who's allowed to enter the community, whatever community it is. So, like we've been, we brought up Antifa, Black Lives Matter, like, these might be outside organizations, but insofar as, the organic protesters, invite them in, and try to benefit from their numbers. The organic protesters are just as complicit as these, far left provocateurs. And I do want to say, that being said, there have been some attempts. There have been some attempts by the protesters to try to police their own. The most like the biggest one that's come out so far is they were shooting fireworks at cops in Baltimore, and it was actually people in the in the protest who got him and brought him to the police. So it is happening, but clearly not enough.
I think you make some really interesting points there, and I do agree on the complicity aspect. I mean, I think that's one really important thing I would say on this, is that we can't allow them to get away with this idea that they can disentangle the protests and the riots. I mean, this is one organism, this is one thing that has emerged, and in my view, there really is no disentangling them. And people, if you know people who are going to the protests, and you're in a position where you can talk to them about it without damaging yourself in some way. I mean, you need to make it clear to them that they are complicit in this violence just by going. I mean, in my view, I think you could probably make a fairly scientific case even that a mob is a living organism in the same exact way that a human being is. I think when people do come together in these huge biomasses, you do get this like metaphysical consciousness that emerges beyond just the individuality. And when you're joining that entity, you're sort of adding your individuality to that collective, and it doesn't really matter. In the same way, it doesn't matter if the cells in my hand want to move this way or that. I dominate them completely. When you join this collective, you submit yourself to it, and it doesn't really matter what you think anymore. You've already made the decision to, enslave yourself to this greater consciousness that's just going to do whatever it wants. And that's the thing that just can't be allowed or tolerated. I mean, if people are doing this, it doesn't matter if you're individually peaceful, and maybe you can get a pat on the back for trying to stop some violence. But at the end of the day, we have to say, look, you can't be a part of this if you see what's going on. There is no disentangling it, and people need to be socially shamed for it. I mean, I guess that's all I can say on that. That's what has to happen.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Sadler?
Yes. Sorry, I was looking for something. Yeah, I agree. There is a. I mean, this is why we have criminal organizations. I'm not saying a protest group is a criminal organization, but that's why we have that concept. Is there is group responsibility in groups that you willingly choose to submit yourself to. You can't. You can't you can't be in a group of people where like half the group of people are destroying breaking into shops and stuff and say, oh no, I was a good boy, I didn't do anything. Like that's not like that's not how that works. Even if you don't get criminal punishment, there's still you can't say like, oh, you can only get rid of the riots, you can't get rid of the protests, when the riots and protests are inseparable from each other.
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of rights as well, that's something Benedict mentioned. I mean, we all kind of know that this concept doesn't really exist. I mean, the right to association is kind of, it's not even in the First Amendment, right? But even the First Amendment itself is just sort of, I mean, it's kind of a meme to call the Constitution a piece of paper, but that's literally what it is at this point, right? There's no respect for it anymore in the law. So in terms of respecting the right for these people to assemble, I mean, that's just kind of a non argument at this point from any side, right? Like, you can't really appeal to the right to assemble and justify your actions that way. We're playing a whole different ball game in the 21st century here.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know many people have mentioned this already, but just like literally 2 weeks ago, these same state governments were trying to prevent people from protesting a lockdown. And it literally seems like something out of a sitcom. You have a complete role reversal. And I mean that, and I'm not even like, I don't know, I'm not saying that I necessarily even supported those protests either. I didn't really care. Either way, but that was at least a protest with something that was tangible and time sensitive. Like it doesn't make sense to say, oh, protest 6 months from now after the lockdown's over. But like, what are these riots and protests for? Ending racism? I mean, the officer was already arrested at the beginning of all this. It's not like it has anything really to do with this specific case. It's so obviously ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, this has nothing to do with George Floyd anymore, right? That's clear. I mean, we could talk about him, right? And from what I saw, the cop basically executed him, and obviously, if he is guilty of that, should pay the price for it. But nothing that's actually happening at this point has anything to do with George Floyd anymore. I mean, this is just an unleashing of a resentment, as Nietzsche would put it, from one part of the society against another. I think also, people tend to focus on race a lot in this, but Tucker Carlson had a interesting take on Fox News. I think just last night on his show, he talked about how what we're seeing is a class war disguised as a race war, and I thought that was a really interesting conception, because that is very much what's going on here. I mean, we're kind of witnessing in this theatrical way. It's very surreal. A sort of war between the elites at this point, between the two main factions, Trump and then basically the entire cathedral. They're all at war with each other right now, and that's this is all this is affecting a lot of normal people in a very bad way. But we're all just ultimately just sort of pieces on the board to this massive event that's happening above our heads right now, right? Like, we can't even. This isn't even something we're really capable of contributing to one way or the other. They're playing this grand chess game for the future of the country right before our eyes.
Yeah, I think your point about bringing it up as a class war is definitely interesting. I don't know if you guys seen the Distributist recent video where he talks about Dr. Horrible's sing along and the left incel problem.
Yeah, I saw it.
I'm still catching up on his last live stream.
Okay. So, just to catch everyone in the chat up, although I'm sure a lot of people in the chat have seen it, basically the premise the Distributist used here was, he pointed out how there seems to be a conflict between the left's desire for a proletariat revolution and the left's desire for equality, particularly among gender. And he brought up the problem of incels. Dr. Horrible, in a sense, is an incel. Is he the villain or the hero? And in the context of Dr. Horrible's sing-along and the leftist discussion that surrounds that, the Distributist points out how the left is really not able to resolve that question in a satisfying way. And I thought that was really interesting, because one of my friends who's a police officer recently asked me about incels, and he said, "Yeah, it's kind of a crime interest of mine as far as the incel threat." And I was like, the population you work with, you work in an inner city. That doesn't seem to be where a lot of this issue happens. And he's like, yeah, but what happens when, the inner city community, discovers like the incel, and the MGTOW philosophy, like all that stuff. What happens when, this population that has had the complete destruction of the family unit, like what happens when they're like, yeah, maybe women are to blame for this, like, or not women, but the sexual revolution.
I don't know. I mean, that's interesting. I've never watched the actual movie Doctor Horrible sing-along blog. My only I never even heard of it. My only experience of it is from that video the distributist made. My takeaway from just having seen that video is it seemed pretty clear to me that men were supposed to be the bad guys. Not even necessarily just those two men in general, and that the woman was supposed to be the good guy. I don't know. It seemed it seemed odd to me that feminists would have a problem with it. It seemed incredibly blatant feminist messaging about how objectification caused a woman to die. But yeah, it. I don't know, that's interesting. The stereotype I have of like the inner city crime. It doesn't. I mean, this is just a stereotype, but the stereotype I have of it doesn't generally correlate with an inability to get dates or women or that type of stuff.
No, but you know what it does correlate with?
Like single motherhood and stuff.
Domestics.
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Domestic assault, domestic disputes. Okay. Yeah, I mean, when we think of inner city crime, we think of drugs and guns, but an incredible amount of calls police officers respond to are domestic situations. And it's actually a lot of these domestic situations where arrests happen. Because, you might arrest someone for drug possession or drug distribution, but he gets out of the jail like the same day. You arrest him because his girlfriend is crying that, he hit her. The guy stays in jail for months.
Yeah, that makes sense. But yes, that's an interesting hypothesis, but I'm not sure if I have much more to add to it. I'd say my main issue with the incel types, having met some of them before, is their complaint. I don't really think they generally have any problem with the sexual revolution. Their complaint generally seems to just be that the sexual revolution isn't working for them individually, not that there's any sort of real deeper problem. I mean, they'll complain about hypergamy and they'll complain about certain problems from it, but at the end of the day, with most of these people I've met, it seems like they're just complaining that they're not able to get their dick wet, not that there's the actual larger problems that have been created by the situation.
You broke your own rule there. So my thoughts on with the cursing. I mean,
is dick a swear?
It totally is.
Okay, I don't know.
You need to scratch that one off. But
okay.
My thoughts on what Benedict said. So I mean, I didn't see that video, but I did see people. I might have even been the distributist tweeting about this like a day or two ago. Like basically how we've been asking what is the end game in this situation, because it just doesn't make any sense. And I guess the thing to realize is there is no end game. Like in terms of the situation described in that distributist video, by the sound of it, it's like there's no tangible solution that can be described that's in any way real, that the left has to anything. They don't actually have some sort of end state in mind. They just have movement. They have a direction. And I think what we have to realize from this is that what we're in opposition against isn't it's not like it's specific policies or ideas per se, right? We are against certain ideas specifically, like abortion or something. But what we're really dealing with is not so much specific ideas, but a process, right? We're against the process of leftism itself, and this is sort of described in the bio-Leninism essays as well by Spangel, in how the left doesn't actually have an end state. It's sort of just it's this force that moves to the left due to certain natural conditions, it would seem, according to that thesis, and it simply goes and goes until it collapses. There is no actual endpoint. There is no actual solution to anything. It's just sort of this beast that progresses. And I think conceptualizing the problem more as a process than specific events or ideas is really the way we need to be looking at this thing from this point onward. This helps you out too because it sort of relieves you of having to debate, I guess, the specifics of this or that issue so much when you can just tie it to this general process of degeneration, right?
Sure. I don't know. I guess I don't really. Yeah, I don't really disagree with the idea that it's a process. But what I find it's interesting is that, while many other processes kind of hit the black community first and then hit the white community, opioids is the first one I think of. This is one where, like, inceldom was kind of seen as a white thing. I mean, maybe unfairly, but you got the Elliot Rodger thing. But what happens when it hits the black community? Like, what happens when people start asking, questions like why, what in those communities, where, in a sense, black men really do bear, kind of like the brunt of a lot of societal problems. What happens when they start looking at legitimate grievances?
I mean, it's hard for me to envision how we would even get to that point where the incel problem is part of their community, right? I mean, just by the nature of the black community, they seem to be a lot more virile than whites at the moment. And, I think these forces are going to balance out, right? Like the lack of if white men, maybe even other races as well, don't have sufficient sexual energy outputting into the society, nature always fills this power vacuum, right? So I mean, maybe this is something that could happen in the future, but I'm not sure that this is really like a problem that's on the table right now. I mean, I guess if it did come up, we would need to deal with it in the exact same way we would try to deal with the incel problem. And I mean, I guess that's kind of gets back to what I said, right? It's like we're not so much attacking specific problems here as we are attacking the process itself, or at least that's what we need to be doing.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because as Benedict said, the black community in the United States, at least, is kind of where the forefront of a lot of the problems of the sexual revolution has been felt. But I don't know. I mean, it's kind of, there's, I suppose, two different things here. One is just the sort of when we use the term incel, I think what we're generally referring to is more of a political label than a descriptor of guys that can't get girlfriends. More of the sort of incel community. I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of black guys that can't get girlfriends. But the sort of internet community of inceldom seems to be mostly a white and Asian thing.
Mm.
It's just like, it's kind of a subculture, which, there's no reason that black people couldn't join that subculture. But from my somewhat limited experience in it, it doesn't seem like they're a big part of that subculture as of yet.
Yeah, probably not. I mean, especially due to the, I guess, demographics of class, right? I mean, this seems to be a very middle class phenomenon, I would say. And
yeah, it does. I actually was just talking with an incel just a couple days ago, and he said he actually described himself as very wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it seems to generally be a middle class thing.
Yeah, I mean, and that might even be related to, I guess, living too comfy a life, not sort of exposed, not sort of I guess like building you up as a man to the point where you just sort of naturally don't have this problem, right? Like this isn't a natural problem for human beings to have, not just men. But I think probably the decadence of middle class life in the United States sort of leads to the failure to actually develop the proper social relationships, and maybe not just the decadence, but also just the alienation that people face, and the atomization, more accurately, I would say. So I guess in terms of actually dealing with the incel problem and preventing the incel problem from reaching the Black community, we need to avoid allowing them to become atomized and too decadent. I mean, not that we want them to be poor, right? But I think that this problem is tied to class in a very specific way.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a certain amount of truth to that.
Is there anything else on that, Benedict?
No, I mean, I was mostly bringing that up. It seems like, we've got a bunch of different loosely connected threads concerning, the riots, the politics, and, the socio-demographic angle surrounding it. I don't know if anyone has kind of, I don't think any of the three of us expected to come on here and be like, well, this is exactly what's happening and kind of lay it out. This is more kind of like a brainstorming session. So, if people in the chat have questions, want to bring them up, or having interesting ideas to discuss, this is a conversation, guys.
Yeah, I would like to. In previous streams, I've not been incredibly responsive to chat questions, so I'd like to try and do that a bit more. So, at Settlers Lament. But one person earlier did bring up something which I think is interesting. I'm not totally sure. Is what are the possible ramifications for if the military gets involved, both in terms of the election, but also in terms of the possibility of using the military in the future against right-wing movements?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think this is the thing that's really concerning people right now who are paying attention to this. I mean, I see it as a game of brinksmanship being played between, the cathedral and the Trump admin right now. And, against the dissident right generally, right? But Trump is sort of this huge target for them. So, of course, it's going to be framed that way. I think we're entering in the really dangerous territory here. And we should be... this kind of thing can't be tolerated from the American government. I mean, we cannot have our politicians openly baiting the president into starting a civil war. I mean, that's how we have to put it, right? That's what's happening is elements of our government are in conflict to the point where they're literally, playing a game of chicken with a potential hot war on U.S. soil over, some very stupid things, to be honest. I mean, there's no reason something like this should escalate that far, and yet that's on the table, right? That's been put on the table. So in terms of the use of the military, right? So what Trump said regarding the military is he said that the government or the governors would need to bring order to their states or using the National Guard, or else he would bring in the military. Now, there are a couple ways this could go, right? So I don't know what he meant by military. There are a few ways that he could deploy the army and not the National Guard, and that would be a really bad scenario. That would really kind of de facto be a civil war at that point. I suspect he would use the National Guard, though. Although, as we know, they did back off before. But I expect with a proper plan action, they would be able to bring, back under control swiftly. But you do bring up the point that does set a pretty strong precedent for the use of the military to suppress, any sort of activist. And we see that several governors are, declaring white supremacy as a public health crisis right now. I don't know what the particular laws of any given state are, but generally sort of emergency public health declarations like that will give the executive some sort of powers that they wouldn't normally have, right? And that I could very easily see that, including some particular law enforcement actions that they could bring to bear in the future.
Can we talk about how ridiculous it is to make racism a public health crisis? Can I take off work and be like, sorry, I'm racist today?
Yeah,
I know. I mean, it is the logical end point of everything the left does, because left is all about what I guess we like to call scientism now, and it's racism, even if that word does mean anything. It's not just like some sort of abstract philosophical or moral problem. It's a scientific and medical problem, apparently.
Hey, you remember my point last time from Del Noche?
I, I subconsciously, I guess. But yeah, it's just they're just like this is always what the left loves to do. They love to throw some sort of vague science at things and say, oh, this is actually just science that we're doing here. Look, we have doctors that say that racism is a science problem. It's a health problem. Like it's obviously retarded. It's obviously just they're using their credentials to back up their political prescriptions. But because that's what they know how to do.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting insight from the both of you. I didn't make that connection, but it actually makes a lot of sense there. So that's probably the ideological angle behind it, and perhaps how they might even get people to accept it. I mean, I can't believe anyone can treat such a proclamation seriously, right? I guess to get back what I was saying as well, like I think the worst thing that could happen in some ways is if Trump is bluffing. That might be the absolute worst move, because that's basically going to destroy his credibility as president. And his credibility is important in some sense, because it does block the cathedral in certain ways. And if it's obvious that at the end of the day, he's not going to match them move for move, then they'll trample over anything at this point. I mean, that's what they're doing, right? I mean, and unfortunately, this is the game you have to play with the left. I mean, the left is saying, or the cathedral is saying, we're deploying our army, right? Like that's literally what the rioters are. They're the cathedral's army. They're using violence. Are you going to match us, right? And Trump has threatened it, and if they call his bluff and it turns out he is bluffing, that's going to lead to serious escalation, I think, in terms of they're going to accelerate things even further, because they'll see that he's a total paper tiger. So, he didn't put a timeline on this, but if we don't see him, if we don't see the governors or him actually bring things back under control soon, I think that might actually be one of the worst case scenarios for us, because one of the only things we really have going for us at this point in USG is that Trump is not a total pushover, at least. I mean, so what do you guys think about that?
I mean, I don't know about the specifics about, the question about bringing in the army and stuff, but I think we can agree that, people voted for Trump because at least on some subconscious level, like there was a strongman appeal there. And if Trump is not a strongman, and he's seen as a pushover, or he's seen as, he got called on his bluff, that will have an effect at the ballot box. So it's kind of a tough situation, because on the one hand, he doesn't want to play into their game and look like, bring in the military and make himself look like a total fascist. But on the other hand, he can't do nothing. So the question is, what can you do? Like, how can you balance both bad sides?
Yeah, I think at this point, one of the weird things that's happened is he is in the perfect situation now to actually be a military dictator, basically, which is just ridiculous. But I think he does just have to go this route at this point. I don't think there's anywhere else for him to go other than to either by proxy use the National Guard by demanding the governors do it, or just deploy it himself. I mean, I think he's been backed into a corner in some sense. Or the Democrats have it. It just sort of depends on who's going to cave first. And I guess that's why this high stakes game is so disconcerting, because we're sort of watching the I guess Nick Land describes accelerationism as the implosion of the decision space connecting to the explosion of the world. And that's kind of what we're seeing right now. Like the decisions that the governments can make, or the elements of the government can make that are reasonable, are collapsing. And they're collapsing towards extremes. And that's leading directly towards an explosion in the actual world. That would be very bad for everyone. So, there is the peaceful way out, if you want to put it that way, of Trump just sort of backing down. But I mean, where does that get us, right? I mean, that's just the ultimate surrender. At that point, you're almost literally surrendering to the opposing army at this point, right? Because I think that's how we basically have to view this. Is in some piece we're looking at a set piece battle here, and the battle's been chosen, and it doesn't really matter what Trump wants at this point. I mean, you need to meet the enemy in the field, and I'm not saying go murder hobo on everyone, right? You don't have to, there doesn't have to be any death at all. I mean, the National Guard can come in with overwhelming force and just get people back where they belong, and hopefully that's how things go. Because what I am worried about is if the shooting does start, that's one of the things that could escalate things even further, right? So even it's all so up in the air. Even if Trump does actually, or even if the governors use the military, I mean, I think they're fairly in control of the riots in terms of propagating them. But when hard force meets hard force, I mean, you don't really know what's going to happen there on the ground. So we should all be very concerned. I mean, I think you always kind of have to go with the null hypothesis of, it's civil war is not going to happen, right? I mean, that's probably not going to happen. Even some sort of guerrilla war, right? I mean, but every time we edge towards it, we should be concerned about it.
Right.
Yeah. Just to answer one question from the chat. Someone said, "What do you guys think of the view that Trump should let liberal cities burn?" That's a super cringe view. If anyone's actually propagating that, all cities are Trump cities. He's the president of the entire country, and you can't just say that. Oh yeah, we're going to let half the country burn. That would be a show of weakness on his part, not on anyone else's.
Yeah, I mean, it's I guess a funny thing to say, but I would only agree with that if there was a formal separation between, like a literal breakup of the United States, basically, right? But as long as he has sovereignty over the nation, I mean, it's on him to bring it under control. And I mean, yeah, it's like you could put it in the domain of the states, but we're way past that type of federalism at this point, right? I mean, he doesn't have authority over the governors, but he kind of does, right? So that's just where we are. It is Trump's problem to deal with, and thankfully he is an absolute genius at navigating these political fields. But at the same time, we haven't seen him in a high stakes situation like this before, at least publicly, right? And that's kind of the scary thing too. Is like, think about what we're seeing. Imagine how much is going on behind the scenes right now. I mean, it must be terrifying, honestly, to see behind the curtain at this particular moment.
Yeah, just as I've said, it's all just so stupid. It just, I don't know. I just keep coming back to that because this all could just be over. Like none of this had to happen. But I don't know, but
it's just the world we live in now, right? We just kind of have. I mean, it's going to get worse as the year goes on. I think everyone expects something worse now, right? And this is
well, yeah. I mean, now that the officer got a second degree murder charge. It is a very realistic possibility that he'll walk at the end of all this, and there will be a whole new round of riots if that happens.
I wouldn't be surprised if they fast-tracked the case just to get to that point at the opportune moment. I mean, so I think everyone needs to be, tuned in 100% on edge, watching what's going on at this point if you're involved in this stuff at all, because things are moving very quickly and you never really know what's going to happen at this point.
Yeah, I mean, so what do I mean, the point you brought up, Settler, the whole idea of the kind of scientism of the left, that I really want to explore that more, because I pointed out Del Noce, but the whole idea there is the new tyranny, as he calls it, what we would call the cathedral. But what in Del Noce's time, the 80s, he only referred to it as the new tyranny. What he described it as was, you're allowed to have your own opinions, but you can't like make a truth claim about your opinions unless it's allowed by the experts, the functionaries of the cathedral. And the way it works is an outright assault. Well, it sounds like ad hominems, but cleverly disguised ad hominems. So incels are a great example. Like, how many times have people said, well, you only say that because you were sexually frustrated or right wing or reactionary, like that's a reactionary opinion, or you're saying that from a place of privilege. Like, they're not engaging with the discussion. They're negating your opinions based on the fact that your opinion belongs to whatever restricted group that's supposed to be the enemy of the cathedral or the progressive movement. And he connected this to how, in the under communism, like, certain opinions were restricted as being again, that's a bourgeoisie, or that's a counter-revolutionary psychology that you're manifesting. You only believe that because you're a counter-revolutionary. Or, in Nazi Germany, you only believe that because you're a Jew. How is that any different? How's that any different than today? You only believe that because you're alt-right.
Yeah, well, I mean, clearly it's not. And, I think this tyranny of opinions is really insidious, because, people, I think when I talk to people that I know in real life about this, the usual response tends to be, well, it's not that bad. We're still like comfortable, right? And like, how bad is it really if you can't like say a certain thing that's unpopular, right? But what happens when the unpopular thing becomes people shouldn't riot in the streets for a week? I mean, that's kind of where we are now, right? It's literally, you're just discounted exactly through the means you just described by being racist if you suggest that. And I think this demonstrates that this sort of mentality just cannot hold. We might seem kind of extreme in our opinions because everyone has food and we're comfortable and happy. And look, like, sure, you can't have certain opinions, but what does it really matter at the end of the day? Well, the end of the day is now there are like 40 cities on fire, right? And maybe some people aren't comfortable anymore. This we're all well-fed and comfortable meme doesn't really hold up when you're literally getting murdered in the streets, right? So
yeah, and I mean, that kind of shows that, in a sense, the left has kind of lost control of the monster it created, because there are people on the left who have tried to say, well, maybe the riots are not a great idea. And, the response is, well, that's a racist opinion, or that's a privileged opinion, stuff like that. So,
yeah, and that's exactly what is described in the Bio-Leninism essay again, is that, there's always another group further left that displaces the others. And that's sort of the trap of being on the left, is you're just going to get outcompeted by the people with even more extremes. So, this system of policed opinions isn't even safe for the people in the system, because eventually they become right wing as well. It's an inherently unstable system.
Mm-hmm.
And that instability is now leaking out of the intellectual world into the real world in a very concrete and undeniable way. I mean, at this point, I don't see how this idea of comfortable modernity holds up anymore when this sort of thing is happening. I mean, this this isn't supposed to happen in modernity, right? And yet it is. It's such a contradiction of how the cathedral says society will be. And one thing we didn't mention, and they're sort of trying to blame this not on themselves but on white supremacists, right? And I saw Keith Woods say this, I think yesterday. He suggested, and this is really interesting, he suggested that they're setting up this narrative preemptively because they're basically waiting for a white guy to do something stupid. And I think that's a very astute observation. I think this makes a lot of sense because, then they can say, oh, well, look, we knew about it the whole time. We knew it was the white supremacists the whole time. See, trust us, we're the media, right? That's what they're waiting for. And that's something that we should really be on the lookout for because they're trying to make this happen. I have a friend who is on the K board on 4chan or whatever. And there are people just fed posting on there trying to instigate this. I mean, this is actively trying to be instigated, and the media is culpable in it, and they're waiting for it. So be on the lookout.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the lead up to the Joker movie. You guys remember that when every newspaper in the country was like, "Now don't go out there and shoot someone up. That shoot up that movie. That would be terrible for us. Please don't do it."
Oh, I forgot about that. That's such a great parallel. That's absolutely what's happening right now.
So, yeah, I mean, that's another angle to this too. Like, the protests are legitimate. The protests are a legitimate manifestation of black anger until they get violent, which is what you'd expect from an outraged, angry population. But when it gets violent, that's when it's really the whites who are doing this.
I guess this actually reminds me. I mean, just the amount of angles that society just being attacked from in this. This YouTuber Semi-Ogog sent me an interesting video a few days ago called "Unrestricted Warfare," and I need to rewatch it again just to grok all the ideas. But I'll link it in chat. I mean, I think we really have to conceive of ourselves being in a state of total war right now, basically. I mean, that's the conditions we live in. And, it might not be war how, you might think of it, how Clausewitz would think of it maybe. But it is that nonetheless. I mean, it's just via completely different means than you would normally conceive of it. So we need to be on our war footing, I guess is what we're saying. And we need to be very disciplined, in how we interact, be it on these streams or behind the scenes. I mean, we want to, we don't want to be, I guess, I don't even know where I'm going with this. I mean, we just need to tread really carefully on the right because they're gearing up for serious crackdowns right now. The whole thing that happened with coronavirus is really scary in terms of what the government was able to do in such a short period of time. And now they're throwing violence in the mix. And, things could get very hairy for you if you're not careful on a personal level.
Well, I mean, yes, I definitely agree with your sentiment there. I'm not sure the phraseology, or I hate to say the word optics, of calling it a war is helpful to us because, in a sense, a war against who? If we want to say the cathedral, sure, but that seems a bit amaphorous to the general population. Because I mean, like a lot of people are trying to put this race war kind of lens on this, and I really don't think it's a race war. Like,
no, I don't think we're in a race war. Not even close.
I mean, in many ways, I don't want to continue the narrative of the poor blacks who can't think for themselves and are taken advantage of. But in a sense, there is a certain sense in which the black community is being used and exploited by the cathedral.
Yeah, it doesn't care about them at all. I mean that's something we could try and point out as much as we can. Although it doesn't really seem like presenting the arguments has been really effective up until this point. But I
Well,
mean, yeah,
when we-
the black community is a weapon to the cathedral. It's just a weapon. They don't care about it at all. This kind of goes back to what we're saying before, right? As like, progressives will take the side of the cathedral because, they care about the black community. Well, what you need to understand is if you care about the black community and you're on this team, you're complicit in them just being used as a weapon. And that's not caring about them, just period. And once again, that's a condition that, if you're in that condition, social shaming for it, right? I mean, that's what we need to be doing. We talk about this, but I'm really of the opinion, I mean, in my personal life, I literally hold nothing back at this point. If I don't go around ranting about politics, but, if these topics come up, I lay it down absolutely like it is, much more forcefully than I would even say on YouTube. And obviously don't do that, in professional context where you have to worry about your job and such. But every opportunity that you have to sort of lay out the reality of the social order and how you would prefer to see it be, we just need to start doing that. I mean, if we want to have any chance of reversing what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain sense where as much as we recognize that we're at risk when we speak out, like at some point we do need to speak out, and the question is, how do we do so effectively while also trying to protect ourselves from legitimate fears of doxing or other repercussions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and that is something to be very careful with. But in any context where you feel safe in that sense, I would say just go in on it, right? Because I mean, the problem is people worry about their friends and family, and I think Aristotle has the three conceptions of a friend, and basically only one of them is a true unconditional friend, essentially to the point of being a family member. And I mean, families can have conflicts, and that's fine. And I mean, it's these things can heal if you have divisions, but at some point you have to lay things bare. And I'm at the point where I don't think you should really be holding yourself back in these personal relationships to preserve them on the grounds that because the thing is, what are you preserving? A fake relationship at that point, right? I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me. So I understand why people are hesitant to and you don't have to like try and start a fight. You just need to be honest, right? And if you want to have real relationships with people, you just have to be honest with them at some point. And
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to be friends with people of pretty much any political persuasion.
Same.
But if opposing like rioting is something that's going to destroy that friendship, then you're just a bad person. Sorry, like I mean, if you support rioting, you're a bad person. But especially if you're going to stop being friends with someone because of something like that. Then yeah, sorry. I mean, what does the left want to do to us? They literally want to criminalize our beliefs. They like literally want to throw us in jail. There's a Fritz has joined us now.
Sorry.
Hey, but yes, just to finish that thought. There comes a point with leftists where if they're going to like unfriend you for having like vaguely right wing beliefs, then like you have to let them.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, like what you said there is one of the reasons I use the phrase total war before, because we're under the threat of violence at this point, right? I mean, I don't know what else to call it, but war is being waged against us. Like you said, they want to throw us in jail, literally, or worse, right?
No, we all have to be united. We're one country, man. We gotta be united.
I mean, I wouldn't call it a war, but I think in a metaphorical sense, I get what you mean, where it's like comparing like to like the total wars from WW2 and prior wars were just fought on a battlefield and WW2 was fought everywhere. It's sort of in a cultural sense similar to that, where it's not like the cultural battles aren't just being fought in one discrete area. It's basically our entire lives now. it's everything is infiltrated with this.
Yeah,
As we just said, saw it today and yesterday. Every single major corporation, it seems like, participated in Blackout Tuesday. And putting out all these statements on Black Lives Matter stuff. They're just there isn't any neutrality. The culture war infects everything.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I guess Semiagog uses the phrase "unrestricted warfare," which is maybe a less unpleasant one, I suppose. Maybe the connotation is better there. And I mean that's the situation we're in. It's like a totalitarian, unrestricted war to the point where it's affecting every single part of your life. Right? That's the condition we find ourselves in.
Yeah, I mean the leftist rallying cry for a long time was the personal is political,
and they're right, I would say.
Well, the thing is, they made it right. They made it the case that it was that way, and because of that, in a sense, the political is personal now.
Indeed.
We can't just say, it's not just these are my political beliefs, but we can be friends otherwise. Like, obviously, I'm not talking about small disagreements, like whether you think, Ted Cruz should be the next Republican nominee or something like that, versus, Marco Rubio. Like, obviously, that's not what I'm talking about. But when it comes to, the left-right dichotomy, the big civilizational differences between us, in a sense, yeah, it can't just be, well, we're friends, but we disagree on these matters. Like, that just doesn't work.
Yeah, and
go ahead.
It sucks to be in this condition, right? Like, it's an abnormal position to have the political and personal basically have merged into one point at this, but I think it is unfortunately the reality.
Someone put in the chat, should I join the National Guard? I don't know that much about the National Guard specifically, but I do think that there is a great advantage that I'm not saying to everyone in the chat, like, leave your jobs and go join the military or something. But if you're in a position where you're still looking for a career in life, maybe you're trying to decide between college and not going to college, consider the military, consider police forces, consider places where you can get training in useful skills, that where also you'll meet people that are friendly to us, to our views. And yeah, from what I know of the National Guard, you do get good benefits. You give up like 2 weekends a month or something like that for a long time. So that sucks. But you do get a college you can get a college education out of that. You do get a pension or something. Like, there are benefits.
I would add to that. I kind of view the military as a calling, and if you feel that, then go for it. But I wouldn't join the National Guard or the military for like a purely political reason, right? So if you're thinking I should get in the Guard and join in the fight, basically, I would say don't do that. Do what you're driven to do, I think, and don't make really big life decisions like that on these sort of incidental political angles. Because like I said before, what's going on is way beyond all of us. And as someone said in chat, I mean, the National Guard, people tend to poo-poo it, but it is a serious military force. It's not something to scoff at, right? So you would absolutely be in the military proper if you did join the National Guard.
What I would say is that in all this, I don't know if this was talked about earlier, but what's needed is when these things happen, there has to be a non-traditional dichotomy response, in the sense that, again, as I keep saying, or as a lot of us kind of, I think, implicitly know, and now even normie conservatives like Matt Walsh are pointing out, that really the idea of America as we know it the idea that like America could be united as a people again, I think that ship has long sailed. This is, I think, demonstrably shown that this country is not going to continue to exist for much longer in terms of like people are now actually taking the idea of it balkanizing seriously. And I think this means that there needs to be a response by people on our side, specifically by Catholics, to start building our civilization out of these ruins. Because what the problem with what happens is that if we want to address injustices like this, even though more white people are killed by police than blacks, it has to be on our terms, not the left's. Because what I've spoken about for years and years, or it's why I started my channel, is Christians using the left's language on racism and that being used as a Trojan horse to get them to accept other things. Like I pointed out the singer, what happened to Audrey Assad, in the sense that she got some progressive friends and turned from a nice Catholic singer to divorcing her husband, supporting the LGBT movement, shaving her head, and becoming insane. And I think that's going to happen. That's going to happen if like normie Catholics start accepting this narrative on race, because you start thinking the language of it, right, is, oh, these people are oppressed, we need to help them, privilege. How long until that turns to, well, women are oppressed, so that means you need to start supporting abortion rights and ordaining women. Gays are oppressed, you have to start supporting gay marriage. It's the same language, but people think that, well, just because it's race, it's fine.
That's a really good point.
And the thing is, like, I pointed this out, is, you know what, people need to watch more VeggieTales. And my point being is that, the most disturbing thing, and I saw this coming a mile away, is, because I read articles back when I was evangelical and read all this stuff, is, like, article after article explicitly saying that we need to have preference for black leadership in churches over white leadership, and that, you know, you have to look to black leaders instead of white leaders. So when you see these videos of like white Christians essentially kneeling in prayer in front of a bunch of black people, well, first off, that's race idolatry. That's literally race idolatry, and it's the episode of VeggieTales, which is based off of the biblical one, where they're working in the chocolate bunny factory, and at the end of it, everybody starts bowing down before a chocolate bunny. And if you don't do that, because imagine if there were people in that crowd that's like, I'm not doing this. I would only kneel before God. Those people will be vilified. Because you know who else was vilified for kneeling before God? Only was the president when he went to the JP2 shrine. You vilified him.
There you go. I was wondering how you were going to bring that back.
The archdiocese, of Washington D.C. No, that's what really pisses me off. Right? Sorry, this is my rant. Is that is these same people, these same boomer priests and bishops said absolutely nothing. No, that's too far. We don't want to get political when Nancy Pelosi and Andrew Cuomo are fine with abortion and are speaking in churches, who, mind you, both of them just today have given speeches or interviews where they're holding Bibles. They know the Bible better, obviously. Them being fine killing unborn children, that's biblical. Trump going, to a Catholic shrine, that's evil. That's racist. How dare he? These boomer priests are awful. I'm gonna stop. But yes, VeggieTales is based, absolutely. VeggieTales predated Reboot and any other CGI show, and it did better. Apparently, it was outselling Pokemon in terms of merchandise at its height. There.
Yeah, that was a really good rant, though, and definitely something that needed to be said.
Bunnies do take me back to my childhood in the basement of a Baptist church.
What?
Like watching those movies in the basement of Baptist church growing up.
I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
Now I'm just imagining you're
No,
in like a dungeon or something.
Not
being
by myself, like
chained
with
up,
the other kids.
chained up, forced to watch VeggieTales.
It was like where we held the Sunday school classes.
Yeah, exactly.
I will say, Fritz is right. I don't know about the VeggieTales, but about how disappointing Catholic leaders have been. Like you consented to the government shutting down our churches, and now they're spray painting and looting the churches. And Catholic bishops are, most of them are being like, well, this is just the way it is. Oh well, like we gotta like stand in solidarity with them. Like, I mean, when Pope Francis comes out stronger than the American bishops against the rioters and looters. And I will say, I think Cardinal Dolan said something against the rioters as well. So, there are some bright lights there. But
and the thing is, though, like I even saw, like the Pope is getting flack for even though him saying kind of the most basic normie thing. First off, that he even couldn't commented on it is something. But him saying, yes, racism terrible, and so was violence. People got mad at him for saying people are turning on the Pope because this is how much they worship black people. That essentially, this is how much they worship the narrative on race, because like because he condemned rioting, and because he didn't name the police officer as being evil. That makes him bad. He's complicit in white supremacy. The Pope is Donald Trump.
One thing that needs to be said here too, just on the total failure of the churches in the United States to deal with this. I mean, in the case of religious practices, I mean, you have both freedom of assembly and freedom of religion being violated at the same time. And like I said earlier, not that these really mean anything before, but the churches are in such a strong position to call this bluff. It's just completely, it's absurd that they're just giving in. I mean, can you imagine the optics alone of police actually going into a church service, arresting the priest or the people attending it? I mean, with all the cameras everywhere, I can't believe.
Well, they do that already. When there's numerous cases, I think, that happen like every year of priests protesting at abortion clinics and being arrested and dragged out. The problem is, I mean, I know this is like a boomer take, but it's the media, and it's the reason why so many people, I kind of have to forgive them for not forgive them. They don't know what they're doing, because when the news that they're showing, I'm convinced, like CNN, MSNBC, and most of the media sources, they're not showing the riots. They're just out and out not showing. People genuinely don't think that there's riots happening.
Right, that's what I was saying earlier. Is I don't think most people actually even know that riots are happening.
No, and the thing is, even if you showed them massive evidence, they won't believe you.
Right, because I've encountered this. I mean, progressives, they literally don't believe quote unquote right wing media, and they believe that when they watch Netflix documentaries, they're seeing the truth. Right? I mean, this is
they think reality is like a movie.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think Argent talks about like how that's kind of how they get informed on like what they think about guns and how guns are supposed to work. Like, what was it? Like Joe Biden apparently was speaking, like he says, well, you don't got to shoot him, just shoot him in the leg. Like that's not how this works.
Probably not. Yeah, no, that can easily be lethal.
Yeah. I actually, to give a short anecdote on that, I remember once in college I met this girl and we were talking, and she said that, and I mentioned that I like really enjoyed history, and she mentioned, and she said, oh yeah, I really like history too. I mostly like to learn about it by watching movies. Yeah.
I had a teacher in high school when we took American history, and she literally, I'm not joking, to teach us about the American Revolution, showed us the movie The Patriot, which is considered to be one of the most historically inaccurate movies ever made. Like, God bless Mel Gibson, but him in that and in Braveheart are not doing history any favors.
Yeah, I mean, it's not wrong to have these movies, right? Like, I think it's fine to like celebrate, I guess, your mythology in that fashion. But
yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
They can't be. The problem is people view them as educational pieces, right? And I'm not even sure
Yeah.
how this happened exactly. Like when did people start viewing movies as being basically documentaries? It's just so weird to me.
Well, I mean, infamously, Woodrow Wilson praised Birth of a Nation as being writing history with. He described it as writing history with lightning, and so I guess it's been going on for well over 100 years.
Oh, there you go.
Quickly, I would like to thank the distributist who left a super chat for $10. He said, "Hey guys, Godspeed. Let's remember to stick together in these times." So thank you very much, the distributist.
No, we have to be individualists. That's gonna fix this.
Yeah, no,
You're
I mean that
atomized
is what the
individual.
founders would have wanted.
Well, the founders are all dead, and the country they left is gone. So who cares? Sorry, that's a bit of is that a bit too spicy?
No. I mean,
Okay.
I guess who cares maybe is a little disappointing, but I don't know.
Well, we're building up
kind of
an-
pause to begin with, right? So.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I'm not American, so I don't need to like pretend that that I love the American founding.
And if Prussia exists, I would have moved there immediately. But
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have much more to add to that, but you said it perfectly. The race idolatry from a lot of Christian leaders is really disgusting. And it is certainly both a Protestant and Catholic thing. It's not exclusive.
it's not as bad as in the Catholic Church, but it's definitely there.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I mean, it's why and speaking of like the optics or earlier is that the churches, like saying the churches were in a great position. The thing is, all of the right-wing institutions are in a perfect position of if you just say no to people and they freak out, you kind of win, because at a certain point they can't do much. Like if a bunch of these like white the white people show it, or it's like there's like videos now of like some of the rioters and Antifa folk are I don't like saying folk, like the left stole that, like we got to support the LGBT folk, and I'm like no, but anyways, when they show up, they've been showing up at some suburban neighborhoods, and all you got to do is get a bunch of like tough white guys with guns or baseball bats, and they all just start running away screaming. The people that do this are inherently very, very weak, but they are, but they know that they have the institutional power in the media to let them do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, saying no is really powerful, and I mean, I guess in some way that's what I'm saying kind of needs to happen at the highest level at this point. Is you just need to call their bluff. If you're a leader in an organization, you need to call their bluffs. I mean, the only way this ends is to say no. And this is kind of a meme, actually. Like there are memes going around with like the Chad who normally says yes or whatever, but saying just no instead, right? And that's kind of the end of it. I mean, you don't need a justification even in some of these cases. You just say no.
Yeah, it is. You basically say, "I'm not playing the game."
Yeah, and
Well,
that's it exactly. I mean, playing the game equals loss. You can't play the game and win.
Well, I think that, I think there's a certain sense where, these people have kind of figured out that in most situations, what the right wants to do is kind of explain the logic. Like because we base ourselves in natural law, because we base ourselves in like objective reality, we want to like say, when they're like, well, these rules are bad, we're like, actually, these rules are good. Here's why. And they figured out that if they just say no and kind of negate everything without providing an explanation and just say, well, you're racist, you're right wing, you're whatever. They can get away with just negating it by trying to say that our worldview is disordered.
So God.
So in a sense, the right has to, as much as it sucks, we kind of, have to be the parent with the 5-year-old and just say, look, we don't have to justify ourselves to you. You're not burning down this neighborhood, and the reason for that is we have guns, and we'll,
Mhm.
if you're ready to discuss it, we'll discuss it with you. But
Till then,
that,
big stick go boom.
yeah, in a
But-
sense, talk softly, carry a big stick. Like,
Sure, but and the thing is, yeah, it's the left's genius in how they took over the culture is by the manipulation of language until they basically created and grafted on their own bubble of logic that is internally consistent to them and people that believe it. And so that's how they can have the convenient way of saying, you can be as horrible to white people as you want, but there's no possible way that, like, there's any recourse or there's any justification or there's any way they have to justify doing it, because they have basically grafted to the point where they've grafted onto mainstream American logic that understands, well, racism bad. And they said, well, no, racism does not include being evil to white people. But
Yeah,
and another note is that when it comes to onto Benedict's point, right, is that there's often the case of, like, the kind of a cornerstone of liberal thought, right, is that, I disagree with what you say, but I'll defend your right to say it. I think the right, at least my view, is that we can't really keep going on to that strain of logic much longer, because, I mean, for me at this point, like we understand every time Republicans or conservatives get into power, they don't really do anything. And then when the left gets in power, they take away, and they destroy. And at a certain point, you can't just be like, well, we have to let our enemies have the same freedom we do. But the thing is, our enemies don't care about our freedom, and, they don't care about fair play. And I'm thinking, if we ever came into full power, I would not at all respect the rights of the left and them to have power. I would just try and take away all of that as much as possible and make it so, and try and make a system so that the left could never ever take power again.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely sensible. I mean, our whole modern framing of rights and free speech and all of this is just a vector for subversion. I mean, all of these journalists and stuff promoting the riots right now, they just belong right in the gulags, basically. I mean,
they're enabling terrorism.
Yes,
they're
enabling,
professional liars.
Yes, I mean, and there are even companies funding terrorism at this point. I mean, this is the rights don't even factor into this. I mean, these people need to be in jail, as Nick Fuentes says, right? Like that's where we're at. So the gloves have to come off at this point. I mean, obviously we don't have the power to enforce this, but we need to be thinking in these terms, right? We need to just completely get out of this game.
And the funny thing is that if you talk to the left, they still, like, no matter how many times every major corporation bows down and does what, and will say, like, we'll do anything you want, they still think that corporations are right wing. Because the way they see it is that it only means that, or they only see it as in they're just what is it? They're just kind of giving us they're trying to placate us with some signs, with symbols, like, because they still know that if you're anti-corporate, like, it would really suck for the optics of the left if the right became known as being the anti-corporate ones.
Yeah, I mean, you look at what's happening now, especially, I just saw a tweet, Bank of America is donating $1 billion to fight against racial inequality. I mean,
which basically means let's talk about how evil white people are.
Yeah, I mean, and that's terrifying. Like
Lego's doing it too.
Everyone's doing it. Every single company is literally saying we're funding terrorism now, basically. I mean, that's essentially
because their businesses aren't going to get. Well, Target got looted, but
it doesn't matter, right? They have insurance and they have so much money anyway. I mean, it's all about enforcing the paradigm. It's not really about the money even more.
And hey, if it destroys more small businesses, even better. We need to get those more. We need bigger Walmarts.
One thing I want to add before I forget it again is, we talked about this leftist language game and how they've captured everything. I mean, the term social justice, for example. I mean, we don't oppose justice. That's not what we're doing. We're actually pro justice, and we can't allow them to get away with framing us as being anti-justice, because we actually want justice. Nothing we've said is about petty revenge or anything like that, or being mean to people. It's like we actually care about communities that are in trouble. We care about the fact that the Black community is being exploited this way. We are for justice. It's and that's why we oppose them. It's not because we're meanies.
Well, what's funny is even the most right-wing take on this is still kind of the normal conservative take, which is that racism bad. Like, at the very most extreme, nobody's going to justify what happened to David Lloyd George. I mean, no, that was the British Prime Minister, George Floyd, Pink Floyd Mayweather. At the very most, it's going to say there are people saying, well, he was actually on fentanyl and died of a heart attack, not the police stepping on his neck. Still, they're going to say it probably was not justified, but obviously all the rioting is terrible. That's the most extreme view I've heard from anybody say. And and the thing is, even for the alt-right, have you ever heard any of them say that we need to just unironically say that they want to exterminate non-whites? The most extreme take about most of them is saying we want white people just to be off in our own areas, and apparently that's genocidal.
Yeah, it is kind of weird that the alt-right has been strangely silent. I
don't think they really exist anymore.
Yeah,
everyone hates Richard Spencer, and after Charlottesville, they're I think the alt-right, it's kind of drifted more into, I guess, I think it's more like the Nick Fuentes trying to infiltrate and convert normie conservatives into some sort of kind of nationalist conservatism.
Well, I mean, I'd just be really interested to hear what Richard Spencer's take is, and that's probably the only time
He's too busy sucking dick.
He's insulting Trump right now. I've seen calling him out for not being strong enough. So he's, as ever, anti-Trump, and I mean, it's not like I even necessarily disagree with him on that point, but that's just where he is right now. He's upset, I guess, that the government is bringing in law and order.
Isn't he gay, or is that just a meme?
I mean, he's definitely gay in some ways. I don't know about literal homosexuality.
His haircut certainly is.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think the alt-right is pretty much irrelevant at this point, honestly. I mean, it doesn't exist, right? It's not a thing. And yeah, but I mean, even that side of things, if you look at someone like Jared Taylor, or pretty much anyone in that domain, the people who want separation, it's not like they think that. Even Thomas Sowell acknowledges this, that Black communities are better off when they're not forced into these situations they're in now. Everyone would actually be better off running their own affairs. So even on the alt-right side of things, it's really not about doing harm to people. It's about everyone being in the position to be the most prosperous in their own community. And
what's fascinating about this is that when it comes to the massive tribalism that exists in the Black community, and really every racial community, if you've seen the statistic where it shows pretty much every race in America views themselves favorably except for liberal whites. But no, non-liberal whites like white people, Black people like Black people, whatever. The only race that actually hates their own race are liberal whites.
Well, I think the problem with that is because the real ethnic group that liberal whites are a part of is progressive whites. So when they say they hate liberal whites, who they hate are conservative whites. They love progressive whites.
Well, I thought when you say the ethnic group they love, I thought you were about to name drop something you're not supposed to talk about. But what I was saying is that what's interesting is that I think when it comes to how entrenched this is in the Black community of the institutions they see as part of them and not part of them, is they will view a Black police officer as white, as part of white people, and they'll view the white Democrat mayor politician who has been ruining their life. I know that's the boomer take, right? That the Democrats are ruining these cities, But it is true. The policies they support, I think, are bad. But they view Joe Biden as being more black than a black police officer. This is true.
I know.
He's going to get 80-90% of the black vote, and you know it. And all he's going to talk about is he's going to babble on about nonsense because he's a senile, crazy person.
Some people have posed, not to get too off topic, but some people have posed that he isn't even going to make it to the election, and they might nominate someone else for the party. And I mean, who knows at this point? I mean,
Hillary Clinton.
Anything's on the table.
Come on.
They could nominate Corn Pop.
Do what now?
That would be the real.
You remember Corn Pop? I don't know. It's
yeah, guys. That would be the real progressive thing for. If Joe Biden stood aside and allowed Corn Pop to take the nomination.
Who's Corn Pop again?
I don't know. I don't even remember. I just know Joe Biden once. Joe Biden once was like rambling on about some black guy called Corn Pop that he. I don't know. I think he was supposed to be a gangster. I might be getting stories mixed up, but I think it was like there was a black gangster called Corn Pop, and like Joe Biden stood up to him. I don't know. It was so ridiculous.
Harry
certainly
likes Corn Pop 2020.
Oh my!
Can we please get that as a meme going?
But how there's like videos where it's like Oblivion NPC dialogue where it has like the townsfolk music and just people saying weird things. Somebody put it over talking about the kids and the hairy legs.
That's
in another universe. I think Joe Biden could have been like the hilarious meme candidate, but it's just the fact that we know he's completely feckless, senile, and like. Or in any other universe, it would be hilarious. But obviously, we know that like the more important person is going to be his running mate. But
yeah, I mean, when you elect Joe Biden, you're really just electing the cathedral.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
more so than any candidate. I mean, even more so than someone like Hillary Clinton. Because he literally is just he's literally too senile to do the job.
I think Trump's going senile. Well, I don't know if Trump. I'm going to be fascinated by is after I think Trump's probably going to win the re-election. If nothing else, in the fact that incumbents, especially during crises, tend to get reelected very frequently. But after he's done being president, is he just going to delete his Twitter? Because what on earth is he going to talk about on Twitter when he's no longer president?
I mean, he'll probably just do the same thing he always does, honestly. I mean, he'll just like it just depends on who gets elected after him, right? He'll either support him relentlessly, hate on them constantly. I mean, I would imagine because he's been doing this for years and years, even before he was president, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the interesting things you mentioned, like electing the cathedral, basically. One of the interesting things is, I mentioned like a war of elites before. Like Tucker Carlson is part of the cathedral too, right? And it's really interesting to see how much control he has over the president and over Republicans generally as a big media man.
Right? Jared Kushner.
Yes. So like,
who are you talking about? Tucker?
Tucker, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like Tucker can influence the president's decisions and like the view of his base and Republicans very directly. I mean, it's really interesting to watch this.
I can attest to that because it's like when I will say to my boomer conservative Republican parents, right, that Jared Kushner has like been compromising Donald Trump for years, they'll say, Fritz, stop. No, that's wrong. Whatever. I don't want to talk about it. Then as soon as Tucker says it, like, oh yeah, we agree with it now.
Yeah. And I mean, he's kind of like one of the main elites on the Trump side of this thing. Right. So I just thought that was a really interesting thing to point out that I've noticed that like you very much see the way the cathedral works in this specific circumstance, where this top media guy on the right, quote unquote, is like he's as powerful as some of the highest elected authorities in the nation. You know.
Well, yeah, I mean that's just is how the human mind often works. Is that we trust authorities, and when there's an authority that we trust say something, we give it a lot more credence than when other people say it. It's can be an unfortunate aspect of human nature, but it is just something that's there.
But it's extra interesting just because it's not just like a normal authority. It's part of the cathedral attacking itself with its own mechanisms. That's kind of what's happening right now. It's I suppose this could be a good sign, really, of the level of disintegration that's happening. If Tucker is really serious about what he's doing, Let's see. Someone in chat says the masses are kind of dumb. We should take advantage of the situation. I mean, yeah, like obviously this is a huge opportunity for us to spread our messages.
I think of ourselves as because like there's the idea that you don't want to make yourself seem like you're an elite, but no, I think it's fine to, or in terms of thinking you're smarter than other people and know better, because I think we do. Because I think of ourselves as, say, like the Christian missionaries in, say, the Dark Ages of, like, being this well-trained, literate monk missionary in, like, 6th, 7th century Germany, trying to explain to these tribes that, the spirit of Wotan doesn't live in this grove. And the thing is, like, that's something that's needed is patience, because the NPC meme is all too real. People are in and will believe what they want to or what other people tell them. Because literally, one of my coworkers, and it's the funniest thing ever, is a flat earther biblical literalist who doesn't think space is real and thinks there's a glass dome around the Earth. No, he literally thinks this. And like I showed him, well, here's live footage from the SpaceX launch, and he immediately dismisses, saying, "No, that's all fake. It was faked." But it's like it's live news footage. You can't Photoshop that. You can't edit that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it sounds like it's weirdly, I tend to like humility, I guess, but I mean, you're basically right. I mean, not to like put us on too high of a pedestal, which, I don't think I am, but I mean, that is kind of what we're doing, right? And I mean, you mentioned NPCs as well. Like, I don't view NPC as an insult. It's more like, if you think of a video game, like you mentioned Oblivion, like the game doesn't work without NPCs. NPCs are a fundamental and important part of the game. It's not that you don't
actually influence things.
Yes, it's not that you don't want NPCs to exist. It's that you want to be the one programming them, right? That's what we're trying to do. Is we're trying to, in our small way, but our side generally, we're trying to reprogram the NPCs, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Not get rid of them, because that's impossible, right? They're NPC by nature.
I think actually the Distributist's video on the NPC phenomena was a very good video. The reality is that we pretty much all are NPCs in one sense or another. Just sort of going along life. That is again just kind of how the human mind works. Though I would quickly like to say one thing. Everyone, make sure to go to my subscribe star and give me money, okay? Like, that's mandatory, so do it.
No, I'm going to buy a sword instead. I'm literally going to do that. I'm going to buy a machete one of these days because I need self-defense, and I live in New York, so getting a gun is like a nightmare. And I don't live in a safe neighborhood.
I'm not usually one for reproduction items, but at this site I look at, they were actually making reproductions of World War I trench maces used by the British, and I thought that was kind of interesting. They're like $40.
No, I think I'm like an 18-inch machete.
Yeah, you could go that route too. Yeah, that really sucks about New York how like the gun laws have been set up there. But I mean, yeah, I would be worried. I didn't realize you were there. I would be worried, like living in.
I don't live in New York City. I live in upstate New York.
Oh, upstate. Okay.
Well, it doesn't matter because like the rest of the state, because everybody lives in Long Island and New York City gets to decide what happens to the rest of the state.
Mm-hmm, yeah,
we're one of those. If we were independent, which we need to be, upstate New York secession now, we could be the great kingdom of Adirondack. We would be along the lines of like Ohio. We would probably be. We would definitely be a purple state, if not a red state.
Oh, didn't someone ask about anime earlier?
Yeah,
put a question up. Was that a question? Oh no. It was just making fun of Fritz.
Yeah. No, I don't think we've had any anime questions really. I mean, other than that comment.
I will say though, I was saying this before the stream started. I actually admire Fritz's just like complete like just absolute weebery, and he just goes all in and doesn't apologize at all.
Yeah, you just own it. I like it's like okay, there's worse things.
Yeah, I respect that.
Argent made a video on why anime tends to appeal to a lot of people on the right, and I think
autism.
Shut up. And
autism, yeah.
But in a way, he talked about how, and it's a phrase I like, is that Japan has a lot more cultural confidence than we do in the West. I think that's a really good point in the sense that, like, if you don't hate your own culture, and if you have some form of confidence that your culture is going to survive, the media and culture you're producing is going to reflect that, as opposed to what we have in the West is people that is, every Western animation is like, I would almost say it's kind of like child grooming, they're actively trying to shock children into accepting things that are like traumatizing, so they're desensitized to it. It's like, why is so much of Western animation so absolutely awfully ugly?
I guess to link this back to the topic in some weird way, I think that is part of the problem with the Black community in America, is that they don't have these deep cultural touchstones. Like I saw this meme today of how in Britain on the BBC and whatnot, they have all these shows where they're casting Black actors in these just absurd roles that don't make any sense. And it's actually, I felt a bit sad actually looking at this, because I imagined like what it must be like to basically have no culture. I mean, I don't know how else to put it, to not have a history.
It's them replacing all these people, saying Britain was always diverse and like there were tons of Black people in the Middle Ages. That's worse than saying Britain's history is racist.
Yeah, but I mean, for the Black community, like I think one way they need to solve this problem is they need a real like understanding of their cultural history, because I mean, it's not like this doesn't exist, and it replacing it with white culture is just really perverse, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Well,
yeah, the solution is, of course, they should become Catholic and venerate Black saints. Patriarch Prime, who's Orthodox, but we share a lot of saints, of course, actually did just do a Black Saints Matter thread on Twitter recently.
Well, they've recently been talking about, there's a bunch of late 19th century African saints. I can't remember where in Africa, but like they were martyred for the faith largely because they refused to accept. Because they wouldn't become pagan again, and also they refused like homosexual advances. So you can tell why a lot of liberal priests won't talk about them. But like one of the most disturbing things is when I talked about grooming earlier is like Nickelodeon apparently like a mom like recorded that like they had like a 20-second ad of just a black screen saying "I can't breathe," somebody breathing. And
yeah, that's creepy.
It's despicable, and it's like you don't really do that in anime.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a Twitter video where some kid was screaming at that on the TV. I mean, I can't believe. I mean, that's just such a depraved thing to do.
What is
it? The like Nickelodeon played this 8-minute video segment of just like a black screen with some political message on it, and you just hear heavy breathing the whole
Oh
time.
yeah, that's what I was talking about.
Yeah. I mean, I just think it's depraved to force children to see that. I mean,
It is funny when it's brought back. It's brought back the meme of the people like unironically saying, "My 3-year-old came to me and talked about what systematic racism was." I've never been more proud.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Don't ever forget what they did to us. Like we can't let these things go.
This is where the only thing I disagree with the Catholic Church on is the death penalty. Even though I'm not even sure that's really the case, that's disagreement, is that I have no problem with thinking we need to execute people that do this to children. And unfortunately, apparently voicing that, no, it's because I said I wanted to execute pornographers months ago. That got me my second suspension, and I just got suspended for a third time until Monday.
What, from Twitter?
Yeah, for because I guess a couple weeks ago, some Muslim guy posted a selfie of him in front of the burning Notre Dame Cathedral, and he just said, "Hey, what if we put you in front of a burning mosque? How would that go?"
Hmm.
And I could tell why it got.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we could not end on a black pill. What's something good that can?
I must scream, but yeah. Read.
Well, we did get a question in the chat on anime. What's your newest waifu, Fritz?
Oh, I said. Well, I'm playing Dark Souls 3 again, and I like the
I
fire.
thought we weren't ending on a black pill.
I don't know.
So one thing that I think is positive about this is if you look at the reaction to the riots, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people being ridiculous about it, but I think this was a strategic overreach by, whoever it is that's, making these decisions, whether it's Antifa, whether it's whoever. Just the public reaction to it, I think, has been, has shown that many people are getting tired of this.
Well, normie I would say the silver lining is a lot of normie conservatives. Like, it's like they're kind of vindicating Nick Fuentes, even if they don't want to say it that they are, because like even Charlie Kirk just started dropping like the FBI statistics. Like even he said like in a rant that like 6% of black men account for 42% of killing police officers, and it's like that Charlie Kirk is saying that.
Yeah. This is something we should address. Actually, is no matter what people like Kirk say, I mean, they're gonna like pretend to come over to our side at some point, right? Assuming things keep going this way. But these guys are untrustworthy. They don't belong in the movement at all. Even if they come over, they need to be completely rejected and shut out because they're dishonest, right? And we can't have dishonest people operating among us on the team. And I mean, that's all I really have to say on that. So like, if Charlie Kirk starts going more, American nationalism style and red pilling people, great, but he's still awful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I think now's good time to end it, unless anyone else has anything left to say.
No, I got to go to work in an hour, so I need to get something to eat.
Okay, well, everyone just make sure to subscribe to everyone here, especially me, because like I matter more than anyone else here. But Benedict too, because he's really undersubbed. But yeah, please make sure to subscribe to everyone.
I'll be starting to make videos again in July when my contract is over.
So yes, please, all of us do make good videos, or at least Fritz made good videos several years ago, and hopefully soon. But yes, and give me money, and that's basically all I have to say. Goodbye, everyone.
All right, go with God.